Coming up on KCCI 8 News Close-Up, Iowa education reform. The House making changes to the Governor Reynolds plan. A look at those changes and what that means for the bill's future.
And Trump charged. The former president now faces 34 felony counts. How this could change his campaign.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close-Up.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Close Up. I'm Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker.
And I'm Chief Investigative Reporter James Stratton. Thanks for joining us. Governor Kim Reynolds' education reform bill passed the Iowa Senate last month. But last week, Iowa House lawmakers made several significant changes to the bill and sent it right back to the Senate.
So I sat down with Senate Education Committee Chair Ken Rosenboom to talk about those changes and whether he expects to get this bill to the governor by the end of session. You have been a large supporter of this bill. Tell me a little bit about why this piece of legislation is so important to you.
Well, it's important to me because it's important to Iowans. It's important to Iowa parents that have a growing concern about content, both in maybe some coursework and also books that they find is inappropriate for their children. And that's what's driving it. We never drive the agenda, the people do. And I've had dozens, probably hundreds of conversations with parents, with teachers, with administrators, and of course with the governor. The governor made this a priority this year, and I've worked side by side with her and her staff to craft legislation that we think is reasonable. We hear a lot of political rhetoric, of course, but I believe what we crafted in the Senate is very reasonable, and I actually think is very consistent with what most schools are doing around the state.
I want to talk about specifically that content piece. At least the language in the version of the bill that the Senate passed says that content in schools has to be age appropriate.
Right.
That definition says written description or a visual depiction of a sex act. Now, opponents of this bill have said removing books that aren't age appropriate is banning books. I know you have said this bill doesn't ban books, but this bill would remove some books from the classroom that don't fit that definition.
I've thought about that term book banning a lot because I believe it in itself is inappropriate for this conversation. To say this is banning books would be the equivalent of saying that Hollywood bans movies. And what I mean by that is Hollywood, in all of my lifetime, has recognized that there's age-appropriate films, and that, depending on the age of a child, that what's appropriate for one age is not appropriate for another. And that's the analogy I've often used, is Hollywood, and of course Hollywood, they're purveyors of violence and sex. That's what they do. And all the rating system, I reviewed the rating system just this year again on how that's done, and it does recognize that age appropriate is a very important component of any movie, of any book, of any course curriculum.
Now, moving to a separate piece of this bill that the Senate and House do seem to agree on is that it would ban any instruction that's related to gender identity or sexual orientation in Iowa elementary schools. I talked to a mom of a transgender 7-year-old this past week who had told me that even though that her child will still retain freedom of speech and can talk about her identity, having it be illegal for teachers to speak about her identity makes her child feel like she's illegal. What's your response to that as a lawmaker?
There are a variety of people, diversity of people in the world, but I think up until recent years, the boundaries that separated children from some of these discussions were kind of understood by society and were in place. I do not believe, I don't think a lot of Iowa parents believe, that discussions, for instance, of gender identity are appropriate for in the bill. It's K through 6. And I think the vast majority of Iowans would agree with that conversation should be held. That's a family matter, that's a parent-child relationship, and does not have to be part of the content for all children.
Just in conversation with that mom this past week, one thing she wanted clarification on from lawmakers is, let's say, so her daughter, she's out on the playground and some other student is calling her the other name and her daughter feels like that's bullying. She goes to the teacher and asks for the teacher to intervene and stop that bullying, but the teacher can't talk about gender identity. The mom asks, is my daughter going to not have help when it comes to her being bullied?
Well, that's a very narrow circumstance, which I'm sure is real to some people. But we pass laws to the masses, not to the individual at times. And I would hope that a teacher and administrator can have an adult conversation with that child and with the parent. The intent of the law is what's important here. The intent is that our professionals in the classroom don't play a role of actually hiding important information from the parents. That's the intent of it.
Do you still expect this legislation to be to the governor's desk by the end of session? And B, what changes can we expect the Senate to make to this amended version?
This is the legislative process at work, right? I don't remember how many pages the original bill was. It was very focused on parents' rights, and that's what we passed out of the Senate. And then the House did the strike all amendment, which put, and we agree with much of the language that's in the House. We've always been on the same page with that, with this discussion we just had about discussions of gender identity and age appropriate. The House and the Senate are hand in glove on that. The House chose to throw some other components of education into the bill, smaller pieces of legislation that they had passed independent of this. And that's what I mean, the legislative process at work.
Coming up, so what do Democrats think of these education bill changes? We asked State Senator Herman Kornbach.
And Trump charges his trial could start just a month before the Iowa caucuses. How this could impact the former president and the other Republican candidates in the race.
I know you couldn't hear it, but read a little bit of it.
Yeah, I
because
did.
know I'll mention it.
I'm generally familiar with the arguments that they're likely to make.
Welcome back to Close Up. You just heard from a Republican senator about the changes made to the governor's education bill, but what do Democratic lawmakers think? I'm joined here today by ranking member of the Senate Education Committee, Senator Herman Kornbach. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
Well, you heard in that earlier interview, Republicans say this bill is aimed at protecting kids and protecting parents' rights. You've said on the Senate floor the opposite. Why do you disagree with Republican senators?
Well, I think they do try to market it as protecting parents' rights, but if you read the bill carefully, you'll see it does more to reduce parents' rights than to promote them. To give you one example, the human growth and development. That's been a required part of instruction since, I don't know, since forever, since as long as I've been in the legislature. But now what the Republicans would do would exclude the discussion of gender identity and sexual orientation, even for the parents of kids who want that kind of instruction. Now, one thing that people need to know, parents who object to that instruction, under current law, they can already opt their kid out of that, all right? So those parents have their rights protected. It's the parents who have kids who may be LGBT who want their kids to get some guidance and some understanding about the world around them and how they're supposed to fit into that. It's those parents whose rights are being denied. And it's not just the parents of LGBTQ kids, it's also the parents of majority population, let's say kids, who want their kids to be able to understand the other kids in their classes. Maybe their cousin or their neighbor or their school chum is LGBT. They want their kids to be able to understand that. We're growing into a much wider world, a more accepting world, a world that people need to be able to have greater skills in relating to people who are unlike themselves. And that's why I think that those parents' rights need to be respected as well. Not just the parents who object. Their rights are already protected under Iowa law.
One mom that I talked to this week told me she feels the opposite of that. She feels like this bill is necessary to protect all parents' rights because in her perspective, she believes conversations like what that you mentioned should be only between a parent and a child, not between a teacher and a child, and that she says her children will not feel safe at school unless this law is passed. What's your response to that?
Well, those parents already, as I said, it's already part of Iowa law that they can opt their kid out of the human growth and development if they're uncomfortable with any of those topics for their kids. If they don't feel that their kids are mature enough or that they would cause them some mental discomfort, they can opt their kid out. Their rights are already protected. It's the rights of the parents who want their kids to have that kind of instruction, both for, like I say, for their own growth and development or to understand the growth and development of their cousin, their neighbor, their Cub Scout friend. Those parents' rights need to be respected as well. This bill would take those rights away from those parents.
Moving to a different piece of this bill, because there are many changes in this bill. One piece would remove books from Iowa schools that don't fall into the age-appropriate category. The bill defines that as a written description or a visual depiction of a sex act. Republicans say that's regulating obscene material, just like Hollywood regulates movies. What's your response to that argument?
Well, you used the term obscene. The term obscene is defined in Iowa code. It's a balancing test. It looks at parts that might be objectionable to some people, but then it balances that with the literary, artistic, historic, scientific, philosophical guidance that might be gained from that, and it applies a balancing test to the definition. That's what we ought to be doing. What the Republican bill does is simply focus on the description of sexual relations and say, if it's got it in there, then the book is out. Well, by that standard, the Holy Bible would have to be removed from school shelves, right? Any kind of balancing test, my goodness, the Holy Bible is one of the most important books ever written for its value as literature and art and history and, of course, above all else, moral guidance. But under the Republican test, those factors don't come into play. There are passages in the Old Testament that describe serial incest, that describe gang rape and dismemberment, that describe masturbation. If you only apply the test about describing sexual acts, under the Republican standard, that book can't be in the school library, where the kids might have a chance to read it.
Now, talking about the trajectory of this bill, we're getting close to the end of session, and we have seen a lot of education bills already make it to the governor's desk, a lot of bills that would make changes in schools that Democrats have opposed vocally, and the bill's still passed. This is one of the remaining bills you oppose that hasn't gotten to the governor's desk. Do you think that there's a chance for Democrats to stop this bill?
Well, I tell you, what strikes me most about this bill is what isn't there. One of the things that ought to be addressed is mental health. Our kids in our schools are facing some real mental health challenges, whether it's the pandemic or school shootings or the internet and social media. Kids are under a lot of pressure these days. but schools don't have the resources or the mental health counselors in place to deal with kids who might be in crisis situations. And I'm very concerned about that. There's also a teacher shortage. We had 1,000 teaching jobs that were open at the beginning of the school year this year. Now, the bill in question does one thing about that. It dumbs down the standards for getting a teaching license. It says you don't have to actually have done a classroom experience, a practicum or a student teaching in order to get your teaching license. You can all do that through an online course. Well, I tell you, I taught school for about 40 years, mostly at the university level. But teaching is a lot about looking the kids in the eye and kind of sensing, are they getting it, or do I need to back up and reteach something?
Senator, I'm sorry, but that is all the time that we have today for this interview. Thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, I wish that something more effective with regard to teacher shortage had been in the bill.
Senator, thank you.
Still to come on Close Up, former President Donald Trump raising millions after he's charged with dozens of felonies. What those charges may mean for the Iowa caucuses come next February.
Hear it. It's just they have it in my ear, so they're like, okay, 30 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds.
Oh, all right. Well,
Sorry to make you wait. Now it's our turn.
No, I know, no worries. No, we should be totally fine.
All right. Well, let's see. You get your mic
I
back.
will trade. Dennis, you're gonna come here.
Here.
Just shout. Wonderful.
Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so
Good to
much.
meet you.
My pleasure.
Oh yeah, don't forget that.
Nope.
Get this. Nice to see you, Senator.
So what grade do I get?
I'd forgotten the point about the Bible. That was very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on over, sir. Got a little bit of a Trump setup ahead of you. He counts to 10.
Remind me what your first question will be. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, minus 1, minus 2, minus 3.
You're good.
And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. Never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it.
That was former President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago last week, just hours after he was formally charged with 34 felony counts in a Manhattan courtroom. That made Trump the first former president in U.S. history to face criminal charges. He pleaded not guilty to all counts. On Tuesday, New York prosecutor Alvin Bragg accused Trump of falsifying business records in order to commit and conceal another crime, a felony in New York. The indictment says he tried to conceal potentially negative information ahead of the 2016 election. His next scheduled court date, December 4th. Prosecutors want opening arguments in the trial to start in January. That'll be just 1 month before the Iowa caucuses. Trump's lawyers would like the trial to start next spring, of course, during the campaign for that. For a little bit more on this, we are joined by KCCI political analyst Dennis Goldford. with a look at what this means politically here in the Hawkeye State. Always appreciate your expertise here on KCCI, especially on a Sunday morning. The first question I think is the elephant in the room, is what this means for a person running for president politically.
It's certainly a complication, but much remains to be seen. We have to remember that there are several groups of Republicans, one of which, of course, is that base that establishment Republicans are afraid of. They don't want to offend. But former President Trump is wrapping himself around that base, and they will be with him until the end of time. Those less committed to him, the more establishment Republicans, will be the ones who say that they're worried about the possibility of this indictment coming and a possible trial in the middle of campaign and primary season. So they're very worried about that.
And we're going to get to the timing here. Hopefully we get time for that question. We talk about rallying the base in the primary side of things. So even if it does rally the base in the primary, what does it mean? I guess everyone wants to win a primary, but they also want to win a general. So what does it mean then in the general election if it gets to that point?
Well, you know, I've heard Republicans say the only possible Republican nominee who could not beat Joe Biden is Donald Trump. And that's what has these folks worried. But again, there's still substantial support for former President Trump. There's pretty good support for him here in the state of Iowa, continuing along those lines. And we just don't know at this point. We have to remember that as with any lawsuit or legal case, the old phrase is, if you want a sense of what eternity's like, get involved in a legal case or a lawsuit.
Yeah, and obviously waiting until December for the next the trial date, that probably bodes well for that statement that you just made.
If it even comes then, there could be delays still. So
sure, that gets me to my next question. That next court date expected to be here in December, just 2 months before the Iowa caucuses. The timing here could balance that court process, if it gets to the court process, with campaigning here in Iowa, in New Hampshire, name your state, and so forth, up until Super Tuesday and beyond. How does a campaign balance both of that? It's something we've never seen before in U.S. history.
It depends upon the extent to which he's called to be in a courtroom. He's not under any kind of supervision or house arrest. He's free to go where he wants. And so he could well campaign while this is going on, unless on a particular day court's in session and he has to be there. There was a presidential candidate years ago, I believe it was Eugene Debs at the early 20th century, who campaigned for president while he was in jail. So that's not going to happen with former President Trump at this point. But it'll be an inconvenience, but I don't think at this point any more than an inconvenience.
He is using this process to not only rally the base, but also raise money off of it. We saw a T-shirt with a fake mugshot on it. What does it, can we unpack what it means exactly rallying that base and how the base basically follows him to the end of the earth in a way that we have not seen with a candidate in recent years?
You know, Donald Trump didn't discover that base, so to speak, but he uncovered and encouraged it. We recall that in the 2016 campaign, Hillary Clinton unfortunately used that terrible term deplorables to refer to a lot of Trump supporters. And these are folks with a tremendous sense of grievance. They just feel, especially the more urban areas, have been disrespecting them. And Donald Trump is their standard bearer. And so to the extent to which they feel driven by grievances, Donald Trump is a candidate of grievances, in many cases his own personal grievances, but that's why they rally to him. He's their standard bearer. He's the one who's going to stick it to all those people who, in their view, have disrespected them for so long.
Talked to quite a few of them outside of his latest rally in Davenport. Sure. They were lined up, blocks down the way, hours ahead of that event. I want to talk about the race in general. The last time you sat on this seat, there was only one other person in the race. It now seems there's obviously a couple more, but they all seem to, no matter if they're running for president or not, back the former president in this case. Why not go against him if you are running against him in the primary election?
It's the base. Republicans, again, are caught because they know that primaries aside, they cannot win a general election without that base, but they can't win with it alone. And one of the reasons why Trump lost in the last election particularly was independents and some more moderate Republicans decided it ain't worth the freight, to use that old phrase. President Trump has a lot of baggage. The question is how long Republicans are willing to pay the freight on that baggage. But at the same time, Those folks are with him. He articulates their grievances, and that's why we saw the speech we saw in Mar-a-Lago the night of the indictment. It was his greatest hit, so to speak, of his complaints about people around the country and politics.
Sure. Quickly, also, the last time you sat on this seat, we asked what's taking so long for the Mike Pences, the Mike Pompeos, the Tim Scotts, name them, of the worlds to get in the race. So the same question still applies in this case. What is taking them so long to either say yes or no, we're in or we're out?
They know they can't get anywhere without that Trump base. I mean, notice how they reacted to the indictment. They didn't say it's time for the Republicans to stand up for law and order. They bought into the persecution idea. They bought into the political prosecution description that's been given of it. And some folks have said, if you can't stand up to Donald Trump, how can we expect you to stand up to Vladimir Putin or people like that? So that's why these other candidates, actual or potential, are really stuck at the moment until something dramatic happens with former President Trump.
I said this the last time you sat on this couch, not going to be the last time we talk to you heading up to the February
Always
Iowa caucuses.
glad to be here.
Really appreciate your time.
Sure.
And coming up on Close Up, the other Republican presidential hopefuls you can expect to see in Iowa this week. Well, it will be a busy week on the campaign trail here in Iowa this week.
Republican presidential hopefuls will crisscross the state. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley will be in Des Moines on Wednesday for a town hall meeting, and then Perry Johnson will be traveling through Iowa over the next 5 days.
South Carolina Senator Tim Scott also returning to the Hawkeye State. He will make stops in Cedar Rapids on Wednesday. Scott has not made a formal announcement on whether or not he plans to run for president, but he's already paid a visit to Iowa as part of what he calls a listening tour. You heard from him right here on KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll be following those candidates this week. Thank you for joining us.
We will see you back here right next Sunday. Have a good day.